and start doing what's right for America. He'd be better off if he would. I can guarantee you that. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate voted to move forward with debate on the legislation that Senator Hatch was talking about a few minutes ago, 80-14. The National Journal says that the Senate this week will spend the week considering and probably rejecting dueling small business tax measures. The Democratic bill would give business owners a tax credit worth 10% of any amount by which they increase payrolls. And by capping the credit at $500,000, Democrats hope to primarily help small businesses. The measure, which is on President Obama's to-do list of jobs bills, is written to win GOP support. But Republicans are expected to ultimately sink the bill after failing to substitute it for a similar House-passed measure. After a procedural vote of 80 to 14, the Senate has begun debating a Democratic bill that would lower taxes for companies that hire new workers, give raises, or buy major new equipment this year. The measure would cost $29 billion over a decade and is backed by the Obama administration. The Associated Press writes that Republicans had considered sidetracking the measure, but decided to let debate begin and use it to push amendments seeking broader tax cuts than Democrats want. We covered a couple of political events today. A Republican presidential candidate, Mitt Romney, in Grand Junction, Colorado, calling President Obama the outsourcer-in-chief and an extreme liberal who's trying to raise taxes on job creators. And at a community college in Cedar Rapids, Iowa this afternoon, President Obama challenged Mitt Romney to join him in allowing tax hikes for rich Americans like them, asking his Republican rival to compromise to help the middle class. You can see both of these Road to the White House appearances at cspan.org. We see a tweet there from Representative Rick Larson about the debate that's happening on the House floor right now on the repeal of the 2010 health care law. Congressmen are expected to use most of the 5 hours of debate time today and continue the debate tomorrow before voting on the measure. National Journal writes the Republicans say that several Democratic members of Congress with tough re-election campaigns may back a House bill aimed at repealing President Obama's health care legislation. The vote, which we said is taking place tomorrow, would be the second such attempt by the House. Only 3 Democrats voted to repeal the law in the last go-round. Republicans predict that there may be more this time. As we wait for a senator to speak, the Washington Post writes that according to a new Washington Post ABC News poll, President Obama and Republican challenger Mitt Romney remain deadlocked at a tied at 47% among registered voters, basically where they stood in late May. The new numbers reflect a stubborn consistency. Only twice in 13 surveys over more than a year has either candidate held the lead, exceeding the poll's margin of error. We covered campaign events for both Mitt Romney and President Obama today, which you can see at our website, cspan.org. We've seen a number of tweets from members of Congress about the House debates that's happening right now on a repeal of the 2010 health care law. Representatives are expected to use most of the 5 hours of debate time today and continue the debate tomorrow before voting on the measure. Our live coverage of the House is always on C-SPAN. On Washington Journal this morning, we interviewed Wall Street Journal reporter about how lobbyists are working on behalf of hospitals, employers, and other industry groups against the health care law. Debate that's happening in the House right now on the 2010 health care law is expected to last until about 8 p.m. Eastern tonight and continue into tomorrow before a vote on the measure. We spoke with a reporter from the Wall Street Journal about the bill.
At the table now, Louise Radnofsky, who is with the Wall Street Journal, health policy reporter, here to talk more specifically about lobbying efforts in the healthcare industry following the Supreme Court ruling. A recent headline from a story that you wrote says, "Health law battle enters next round." You co-wrote this with Christopher Weaver. Just want to read the lead and then get you to dig in on the details. A new front has opened in efforts to reshape how the federal government implements the president's health care overhaul now that the Supreme Court has ruled to keep the law in place. You write here about employers, insurers, hospitals, drug makers, and others are angling for an advantage as the government writes the regulations and sets the policies that will bring the law to life. So take us from the Supreme Court ruling to implementation of the law. Explain first how all that happens, and then we can talk about the lobbying efforts.
Well, really, you want to go back to March 2010 and the 18 months before that when the law was passed, because the lobbying effort there was considerable, and the law that was passed was a big package of a lot of arrangements made with a lot of different people. And now that the law has been upheld after months of uncertainty about where it was headed, there are a lot of people who want to try and renegotiate the bargains that were cut in their favor.
So speak to us first about employers and then insurers. What are they looking to do right now?
Well, for employers, the key issue is a requirement that workplaces with 50 or more employees pay for coverage, a certain level of coverage for their workers, or a penalty. And so what they want is a number of different changes to the way the regulations that have yet to be written finally for enforcing that mandate are drafted, primarily about what a full-time worker is, people who work more than 30 hours a week, but particularly how the law will end up treating people who are seasonal or temporary. This is obviously a big issue for the retail and the restaurant industries. And then more generally, of course, there are folks such as the NFIB that sued to prevent the law from going ahead. They challenged it in court primarily on the basis of the employer mandate, although, of course, the constitutional argument revolved around the idea that individuals carry insurance or pay a fee. They would ideally like the employer mandate struck altogether. Failing that, they would like it to be modified as much in their favor as they think they can get it.
Phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for our guest as we talk about lobbying efforts on health care moving forward toward implementation. Our guest is Louise Radnofsky of the Wall Street Journal. She is a health policy reporter. WSJ.com is the place to go to read her work and the work of others. Talk to us about insurers and hospitals and how the lobbying efforts are taking shape.
Well, insurers actually have a number of concerns about the individual mandate itself. Obviously, it's something that they support, and their concern before the Supreme Court had ruled was going to be that the justices might strike the requirement that everybody carry coverage, but leave in place a number of requirements on insurance companies, particularly related to their the requirement that they sell insurance to people regardless of their medical history. They said that that would make an unworkable system, and particularly an unworkable system for them. So having got past that concern, they now want to see the mandate strengthened. They want greater enforcement of it, greater incentives for people to buy insurance, because they say that the fee that starts in the first few years isn't going to be very big. They're also concerned about requirements based on how they vary premiums based on age. They want to scale back a 3-to-1 ratio to a 5-to-1 ratio. And this is something you're likely to hear a lot about in coming months, because it's really the next step of their campaign and something that they're planning to focus on very heavily, particularly in the run-up to the elections and also after, while these laws are still being drafted and while they think there's a chance to influence Congress on them.
Hospital facilities, groups?
Well, for hospitals, one of the original requirements of the law was that they swallow around $155 billion in cuts. That wasn't going to be too bad for them in the way that it was all negotiated, because they expected to get a large increase in the Medicaid-insured population. That for them would mean fewer people turning up without insurance, who, in the case of people who needed emergency care, were people they had to treat regardless of their ability to pay. Now that the Medicaid expansion is somewhat in doubt, and in particular in states that have indicated they're not going to take the expansion money, including huge states we now know like Florida and Texas, the hospitals are saying, well, at the very least, what you have to do is roll back the cuts. They're also pressuring governors hard to take the money.
Drug makers.
Drug makers they essentially want some of the provisions that affected them negatively to be rolled back. Likewise, the medical device makers, there's a 3.8% tax that they are campaigning very hard for, and in this case they have the support of some Democrats, particularly in districts in states like Minnesota and Massachusetts that rely heavily on the industry. They see this as one area where they may be able to get some bipartisan consensus around repealing a part of the law, although of course it's something that the White House itself is not keen to see, because it's a major part of financing for the law.
Before we get to calls, any general sense of how much money is going to be spent on these lobbying efforts in the areas that you just talked about?
Well, there was a tremendous amount of lobbying and an amount spent on it the first time around. I'm pretty sure that you can expect to see that again. Plus, of course, all the campaign dollars that are going on this. It's going to be a major theme in Democrat and, to a much larger extent, Republican campaigns heading into November. So all in all, I think you could safely put it in the millions.
Let's hear from Thomasville, North Carolina. First, Willis, Democrat, for Louise Radnofsky of the Wall Street Journal. Willis, you there?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
That's a good subject y'all got about lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the insurance companies and prescription drug companies, you know, they, at the Affordable Health Care, stopped the insurance company for years, that they had ran the price up for, you know, insurance company where you can't, we can't afford to buy insurance. And for the Republicans, you know, not agreeing on this here, you know, it beyond me. But now the Affordable Care Help is helping me. I can see what's helping me now is helping 30 million other Americans. And the insurance companies, you know, seem like they should be in favor for that, because the more people that have insurance, the better it is for the insurance companies. You know, the price make it more affordable for a lot of people to afford it. And I appreciate my call.
This goes to the heart of what Democrats in particular had in mind when they designed the law that they ended up passing, which was a series of compromises. And in the case of the insurance companies, there were new requirements put in place on how much money they had to spend on health care benefits or issue a refund to folks. It's around 80 to 85%. So that was one of the things that they swallowed. In exchange, they got millions of new customers. And again, it's why the Supreme Court case had them particularly nervous, because that was really what was at stake there.
There's one passage in your recent piece wanted to get you to expand upon. You write that the White House gave lobbyists fresh hope that they can win changes to the law after the president recently said he wanted to improve the overhaul. Although the legislation Mr. Obama signed in 2010 spells out most aspects of the law, federal officials can materially change it depending on how they write regulations to implement each provision. Tell us more.
Well, the president did signal, including in his address to the nation on the Thursday, that the Supreme Court ruled that he was open to improving the bill. And so, as you say, that's something that people pretty much jumped on as their inspiration for this. Although they've been lobbying for a while before, they just complained that the oxygen was entirely sucked out of the rooms that they had over on the Capitol and elsewhere because of the pending Supreme Court decision. So there's a lot of activity now to come. And then, of course, there is the behind-the-scenes negotiations around the regulations that have yet to be written, as well as some things that only Congress can change.
Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Dorothy, Independent, good morning.
Good morning. I'm thinking about how can the law be repealed when it has now been approved by the highest court.
Yeah. The vote that's taking place on Capitol Hill this week is another vote by House Republicans. It'll be their 30th or their 31st vote to repeal the law in part or in whole. They do face, as you know, limited ways of being able to go ahead with that, because the Democratic-controlled Senate is not going to vote for it, and the White House is not going to sign that into law. So for Republicans who want to repeal the law, their main strategy is take back the Senate, take the White House. And without that, they don't really have a lot of options. In fact, as the head of FreedomWorks was explaining at a panel yesterday, he used a word that probably we can't use on air to explain what their options were if those things didn't happen, but it was not good for them.
You have written, though, that congressional Democrats could also team up with Republicans to amend specific parts of the law. What are you expecting?
Well, the medical device tax is one of those areas that people are watching a little bit more closely as the likeliest area where you might find, at the very least, some Democrats who feel as though that's something that they need to support, in particular given the circumstances in their district. So that's one of the likeliest areas of bipartisan support. Again, whether or not it happens before the November elections is a slightly different issue, because Democrats really want to stop talking about health care to some extent. They want to move the conversation forward. Republicans only want to talk about repealing the law. They don't really necessarily want to talk about fixing it.
In the small business area, one viewer via Twitter wants to know, after 50 employees, what happens to employers?